got to do with it, got to do with it? What's love but a second-hand emotion? What's love got to do with it, got to do with it? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? Emotions. How appropriate that we're talking about emotions during this season of Lent with our theme of lovers and fools. Thousands of songs have been written about emotions and the sometimes foolish things that they make us do. Emotions have inspired poetry, literature, theater, movies, art. And emotions motivate the narratives of our lives. And the stories of Jesus' life are no exception. Last week, Pastor Molly talked about the story of Jesus in the temple with the money changers. What emotion is motivating this story? That's right, anger. Anger. And in this season, we are thinking about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night he spent there with his disciples. What emotion is motivating that story? Grief, sadness, love. And we all know the story of that Jesus told about the Good Samaritan. What emotion is motivating the story of the Good Samaritan? Or emotions? Compassion, empathy, love. I'm going to begin with the most important fact about emotion that we're going to talk about. And I'm going to use the words of a researcher named Brené Brown. We can only love and be loved as much as we are willing to have our hearts be broken. If we are numb to one emotion, then we are numb to all emotions. If we want to open ourselves fully to God's love, then we have to be willing to feel everything, the hard emotions, as well as the easier emotions. That's the good news. By opening ourselves to the difficult emotions, then we can feel more of God's love. And that's why we're talking about emotion. We began this seminar series with Jesus' primary commandment, to love God with all our hearts, all our souls, and all our minds, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. If we are going to open ourselves, if we are going to be able to love with all of our hearts, souls, and minds, then we're going to have to feel all those other emotions like shame and guilt and anger and grief, as well as awe and compassion and delight. But we'll have to feel it all. For some of you, you're already doing that. This is no big deal. For others of you, you may be going, I have to feel all that stuff. May I leave now? It's easy to feel scared that if we open ourselves to strong emotions and to the negative emotions as well as the positive emotions, that we'll be out of control. Well, I want to reassure you, first of all, this is not a therapy session. We will talk about the role of emotions in therapy, but I'm not going to ask you how you feel. And second of all, even though we might think that when we feel strong emotions, we'll be out of control. In reality, we have lots of ways to regulate our emotions. When I first started getting interested in psychology research, I volunteered in a lab where I had to transcribe tapes of a researcher asking people how they regulated their emotions. And I was amazed at the many different ways that we all come up with to regulate our emotions. So not to worry. The title of this seminar is Emotional Literacy. Now, there's a few phrases that you hear in the news these days or in your reading related to that. One is emotional literacy, another one is emotional intelligence. Emotional literacy refers to knowledge of emotions. Emotional intelligence refers to interacting with the world using both our rational mind and our emotional understanding. What we're talking about today is emotional literacy. So first, let's define emotion. There are many different theories of emotion, and most of the theories agree on a few key components. The first one is that the word emotion stands for something that is brief, that an emotion only lasts for 1 to 10 seconds. It's a neurological, physiological reaction, and it's very quick. Second, emotion is a conscious mental state with a quality of feeling that's directed towards an object. For example, looking up at the night sky and feeling awe. You're moved by the nature to feel this sense of awe. Third, an emotion has a bodily change associated with it. For example, fear has the bodily change of feeling fight or flight, that sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system response where you want to either run or you want to fight. And fourth, emotions have recognizable facial expressions, tone of voice, and gestures. So, a facial expression is involuntary. You have no control over this. You can't bring it on at will. And if I tell you, don't show you how you feel, you won't be able to do it if you have an actual experience of emotion. What emotion is this? Ooh, disgust. Disgust. How about this? Happiness. Happiness. Surprise. Surprise. Tone of voice is also clearly recognizable. And we can demonstrate this to ourselves. I am going to name an emotion, and we'll all make the sound for that emotion. Disgust. Ew. Fear. Awe. Triumph. Yay! Contentment. And sympathy. Oh. The gestures of emotion are also clearly recognizable. What's this? Anger. This? fear, love. The final component of emotion is readiness for an action or a social interaction. Emotions motivate us. So let's look at those stories about Jesus again. When Jesus is in the temple, the anger he's feeling is motivating him to protect something that he deeply cares about, something that he believes in. The feeling of anger can prepare us to fight or to stand up for what's important to us. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, the sadness and grief that Jesus is feeling during the night, that is motivating him to ask for support and help. He says to the disciples repeatedly, "Stay awake with me." He needs support. This is hard. That's what sadness motivates us. It motivates both us to ask for help, and it motivates others who see us to offer or give us help. And the Samaritan on the road sees someone else who's hurt, and the empathy that he has, the sense of compassion for someone who's suffering, motivates him to give help to this person. Let's look at a few other emotions as well. The feeling of fear motivates us to escape from danger. The feeling of disgust motivates us to distance ourselves from something that's offensive or contaminating. And if you think about these fear and disgust, then you'll understand why many emotions researchers have an evolutionary perspective to their theories of emotion, because you can imagine that these emotions evolved to protect us and take care of us. The emotion of fear protects us to move away from danger. The emotion of disgust protects us by motivating us to move away from something that's potentially harmful to us. The feeling of happiness motivates us to continue doing something that enhances our pleasure and our personal and our social value. The emotion of surprise motivates us. Hey, look what I got, to be interested and curious about something that's novel or new. There's been lots of research since then about emotion. Early emotional research was done by a man named Paul Ekman, and he did research on emotions from people from Western cultures and various other cultures, including tribal peoples who had never seen white people or anyone from Western culture before. And when he did this research, he came up with 6 universal emotions. And the emotions that he came up that everyone in the world experienced were happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, and surprise. So there's ongoing research on emotions. And so this is being called a little bit into question whether these are the exact 6 universal emotions. However, for the moment, we'll keep with these 6 because it's what's generally accepted. Now, you may say, but I have way more emotions than this. Look at all the emoticons on my phone. Lots and lots of emotions and feelings and expressions. Well, that's true. There are lots of feelings and emotions. You got a handout as you came in today, and on one side, it has pictures of faces of different emotions, and on the other side, it lists feeling words. So the words feeling and emotion are often used interchangeably. And the word feeling is also used for these many shades of emotion. For example, I'm going to read from the list on here of words that starts with angry. So different shades of anger: irritated, enraged, hostile, sore, annoyed, upset, bitter, aggressive, resentful, inflamed, provoked, infuriated, cross, worked up, boiling, fuming. So there's many, many shades of feelings. Merriam-Webster describes feeling as an emotional state or reaction. This is more akin to a mood, which is something that lasts for hours or days or weeks. However, an emotional response is a physiological and neurological response that actually only lasts for 1 to 10 seconds. What happens after that is you start thinking about what happened, and you review it in your mind, and you may have other feelings. You remember the emotion, and you also may have other feelings that are very similar to that. Like you got really angry at something that happened at work that day. And then when you think about it, maybe you feel infuriated. Maybe you feel, a little bit bitter. Maybe you feel resentful. And so you start to have those feelings. Your emotion can change. For example, I'm feeling angry at work, and then I'm thinking about it, I talk to some people about it, I feel sort of upset for a few days and angry, and then I think, I can't do anything about this. So I start to feel depressed. And then, so I'm feeling depressed for the next few weeks. And sometimes this can cause us some problems in trying to work something out in our life, because we have this secondary emotion and even a tertiary emotion that comes after that. And one of my friends says, "You've been moping around." And I think back and try and remember, well, what started this moping? Because I'm feeling depressed. I've sort of forgotten that anger. And so to work that out, I might have to go backwards a little bit and remember what happened. And remember, so I was feeling depressed, what happened before that, and get to that original event that happened, and remember the anger, because anger is what motivates me to take steps and change. So let's also look at some mood words. There are words on here that refer not so much to a quick emotional response, but a mood that we can get into, like sensitive, warm, playful, energetic, cheerful, inquisitive, ambitious, confident, pessimistic, tense, weary, bored. Emotional literacy refers to the idea that we're learning about something. So where do we learn about emotions? We learn about emotions in our families, mostly from our parents and our caregivers. We learn in a few different ways. We learn from their emotional language. So what words did the people in your family use, what your parents and caregivers, to express their frustration? Did they use the word challenge, or did they use the word problem? Did they engage in blaming and name-calling? Did they use profanity? And did they use terms of endearment when they were, there isn't a right and a wrong here, but some families will use words like honey and sweetie and dearie and lovey, things like that, and other families don't use words of endearment. And what emotional patterns did they model? For example, did they express outwardly and physically feelings of love? Did they hug each other? Did they hold hands? When someone walked by you, did they squeeze your shoulder or pat your head? And how did they express something like anger? Did they stomp the floor or punch a wall or slam a door? Or maybe they turned around and everybody walked away from each other and went out to the laundry room or the garage and did some work until they calmed down. Different ways. This is how we are learning. And how did they respond to emotions? Very important. Did they respond to some emotions and not others? Did they validate emotions when you shared them? So say a young child comes home and says, "Mommy, Tommy hurt my feelings." Does the caregiver say, "Sticks and stones will hurt your bones and words will never hurt you. Go out and play, you'll get over it"? Or does the caregiver say, "Oh, I'm sorry that you're feeling hurt. Tell me what happened." And after the child tells their story of what happened, does the caregiver respond, "Oh, I can see why you..." Does a caregiver first validate the feeling before talking about what potential solutions or looking at another perspective? For example, saying, "Oh, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way. I can understand why you'd be upset if you thought that Tommy ignored you." In addition, there are differences in emotionality. In our last seminar, we talked about genes and how they affect what we feel and how we feel. So we would describe some people as having a warm and friendly personality. That would be someone who expresses empathy and love. We would describe a person as having the trait of shyness if they're socially anxious or afraid in social situations. There are, not totally, but there are genetic components that affect our personalities and our temperaments. So what is healthy emotional functioning? I'll use an example from my own life, from my recent life, to explain this. Healthy emotional functioning begins with awareness of what we're feeling. So I noticed in this last month that my chest hurt a little and I found myself crying and my corners of my mouth are turned down. And I recognized that I was feeling sadness or grief. So after that, the next step in healthy emotional functioning is understanding what that emotion is trying to tell us. Well, I only had to look at the calendar to know that I was at the first anniversary of the death of someone who I had loved. So that was only natural that I might be feeling sadness at this time. So the next component of healthy emotional functioning is being able to express and share our emotions with others. So I cried, I talked to friends, and I worked on a memorial for this person, all healthy outlets for those feelings. And finally, we need to be able to regulate our emotions, to change how we feel. It's really important to feel our grief and sadness. The only way through it is to feel it. And yet, we have to go to work. We have to fix dinner for the rest of the family. We have these other things. We need to fulfill our responsibilities. So I would feel my grief, and then I splash my face with cold water. I'd get busy. I'd take a walk or do the dishes or something like that. I'd put on upbeat music to change the channel so that I could leave the house and go to work and do what I needed to do, knowing that if the emotion of grief needed more expression, I would feel it, and I would have time to do that at another time when I was in an appropriate space in which to grieve. Unhealthy emotional functioning or dysregulated emotional functioning can be seen in or mental health disorders, especially ones with mood components. For example, in depression, we would be feeling sadness, grief, perhaps guilt, a sense of worthlessness, a feeling of heaviness, of weariness. In an anxiety disorder, we might be feeling panicked. We might be feeling overwhelmed. We might be feeling tense. We might be feeling anxious. In some emotional disorders, the symptom is not showing emotional expression. For example, in schizophrenia, one of the potential possible symptoms of schizophrenia is having what we call a flat affect, a neutral expression, not showing your emotions. And it doesn't mean that someone's not feeling it, but they're not showing it. And this is as close as I was able to find to a neutral expression. It does not mean that this person has schizophrenia. It just means that it's a neutral expression, and that is sometimes typical of a person experiencing schizophrenia. Sometimes we just don't know what we're feeling. And this can sometimes cause a problem. For example, it might be hard to make a decision if we don't know what we're feeling. It can cause conflict in relationships. We don't know what we're feeling, and sometimes just cause us to feel stuck. So what happens in therapy to help us if we are having trouble with our emotions? So what happens in therapy is that people learn to identify and label their emotions and to change their emotions, if necessary, either by learning to change the emotion or perhaps learning to change the situation that's causing the emotion. They might also, by learning to in therapy, by learning to recognize and label the emotion, come to understand what that emotion is telling them. And in that way, be able to make changes or just experience the emotion. So there's different ways to do this, depending upon who is what kinds of techniques the particular therapist uses, and what the situation is. In our last seminar on mental illness, we talked about cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy is based on the insight that that thoughts cause feelings. So we have a cycle that thoughts cause feelings, we act on that, and a behavior then causes the thought, causes the feeling, and we get in a cycle. I'll give you an example of what that could look like. So it's the morning and I'm getting ready for work. I have my socks on and I run into the laundry room to get a shirt and my socks are wet. I look down and the washing machine, which is going, is leaking. And I go, oh no, I'm gonna be late for my meeting, and if I'm late for one more meeting, I'm gonna lose my job. And so I'm angry and I'm frustrated, maybe depressed, and I'm probably not thinking clearly now, and so I might do something like get on the phone and call the plumber right now and spend 15 minutes talking to the plumber, in which case I'm now late for my meeting. Now, let's imagine that I walk into the laundry room, my socks are wet, and I go, the washing machine's leaking. Thank goodness I caught this before I went to work. In which case I'm feeling annoyed, but probably not too distressed. So I quickly turn off the water, turn off the washing machine, and I say, okay, I'm gonna go to work because I've got a meeting in 15 minutes, and after it's done, I'll call the plumber. So what we think can affect how we feel. We also talked about problem-solving therapy in our last seminar. And if we say we're working with a therapist who's doing problem-solving therapy with us, then what we're going to do in that case is work to change the situation that's causing us to have a negative feeling and hopefully change our feelings in that way. So those are just two examples. There's many different ways in which a therapist might work with you to help you identify, label, understand, express, and potentially act on what your emotions and feelings are. So we can support each other in being emotionally healthy. And the way that we do that is by sharing our emotions and feelings with each other, and by validating each other's emotions and feelings. And if validating feelings is something that you think that you would like to learn more about, there's lots of videos on YouTube about validation. So to summarize, healthy emotional functioning looks like awareness of how we're feeling, understanding what it is that our emotions and feelings are telling us, the ability to express and share our emotions in appropriate manner, and the ability to regulate and change our emotions when we need to. We live a faith whose cornerstone is love. We are only able to love and be loved as much as we are willing and able to feel all of our emotions and feelings. Questions? This is the quietest. Yes.
Can you give me a behavioral modification, whatever that was, for fear?
You mean like a thought process? Can you say what you mean by a behavioral?
The example that you gave. I'm going to be late and then I'm going to my immediate reaction was fear. Just, how could I have really thought that?
How could you have, you mean like if, is your question, and by the way, we have a mic here, so we can use this. So is your question, what could you have, what you could do if you found yourself feeling afraid? To change that feeling?
The sense, excuse me, the sense of fear, I realize as I'm talking, it was paralyzing. And it would have taken me until the afternoon to get to, oh, I'm so glad I discovered this before I went to work. Are there interventions to get you out of that panic and petrified?
So your question is, okay, yes. So your question is, how could you, is there a kind of treatment that would help you so that when you get into a situation that you typically see as scary, that's not actually a scary situation, you could change how you react to it?
Right, that wasn't physically scary.
It wasn't physically scary, but
the idea of losing your job
could be scary. Would you like to answer this? Yes, I am. Becky? Becky's a therapist, so I'm asking her.
Sometimes emotions that we label as negative are really important emotions to have. Like, you know, if you've had some behaviors that have put your job in jeopardy, that having fear might help you think about your behavior and maybe make some changes in your life or whatever. But yeah, if you're just have anxiety, you just have fear that's really unwarranted from the situation. I mean, there are all sorts of techniques, you know, to calm yourself down, as far as, you know, soothing music, meditation, prayer, talking to someone. Is that, I don't know if that's answering your question, Nancy.
It's getting there.
I have another answer as well, I think, which is that, and Becky, you brought this up, which is that the emotion has a message for us. So if you're feeling, if you walked in and you had this thought, I might lose my job, and then you felt fear, because the emotions that I was expressing are not necessarily the emotions that anyone in that situation is going to feel, because we all have different reactions depending on what we think in that situation. So your reaction happened to be fear, so fear of losing your job, and maybe that was an important message for you. Maybe that was, I'm going to lose my job. Maybe it was, I cannot be late for this meeting. What can I do to solve this problem really fast, or get somebody else in here to solve this problem, because I've got to get to work, and getting to work is more important than me cleaning up this water right now. So it might be that, or it could be one of other things like, why am I so scared of my boss? You know, maybe there's something for me to look at in there. So it's going to be very individualized. Does that make sense? Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, continuing on the question of fear, there are plenty of times when we have to do things that are frightening. We have to deal with frightening situations, like, you know, a surgery or doing something new that is actually, you don't know if you're going to succeed or not. And how do you deal with that kind of just reasonable fear that you have to deal with it anyhow? You have to go through with the surgery.
Well, I'll give you my best understanding, and if you want to add something, Becky, feel free. But if you're feeling a lot of, we have to remember that emotion has some message for us. So I'm being told I have surgery and I'm feeling fear. Well, first of all, I'm gonna feel that feeling, and the message is, I'm scared that I could die. I'm scared that the surgery isn't gonna go well. I'm scared about who's gonna take care of my family for the next 2 weeks while I'm recovering. And those are all legitimate fears. So so there's a message in there for me, which is, well, I need to make sure that I need to call my sister and ask her if she'll come and run the household for 2 weeks while I'm recovering. I need to make sure, maybe I need a second opinion, because I'm a little scared of this surgery and I don't feel absolutely confident. That's legitimate. Maybe I'm feeling fear because something in my intuition is saying, I'm not comfortable with this particular surgeon. Let me look into this. Or I don't know enough about this surgery. So then I'm motivated to go learn more about what's going on with it and understand it and make maybe a more informed choice. So in that way, it's not a matter of just trying to stop the emotion. It's a matter of acting on the message that the emotion's giving me. Other questions?
I think this is more like a comment or something. So I was brought up in a time and a part of the country, the Midwest, where males are males. And they're stoic, they don't talk. They don't have emotions, and emotions are effeminate. And I guess I'm just stating this is sort of a comment, and it's taken, and particularly like moving out to California, particularly in the Berkeley area where this is not the case. I'm just trying to say this. It's something I've been battling. It's what is it, more of a culture thing or something? But it's a real problem, and it leads to bad news, because you get up against stuff and you can't talk. In fact, it took me years of trying to talk to somebody to learn to talk. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now without therapy. So I don't know, it's just a comment. I'm trying to therapize myself right now.
Thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciate that this is something that's coming more easily for you now. I appreciate the hard work that you've put into being able to share now. And that's not uncommon for men in our culture. Throughout the United States, there are lots of books and documentaries and articles written about the gender differences and in how we are raised to express our emotions and the challenges that poses for us.
I think that the other thing is friendship. As friends. Males, I've been battling it. Males cannot, it's very difficult. I look at women, and I'm envious, because you guys, everybody has a friend, and you always have somebody to talk to, and you go and you do things together. But males, if you don't have a wife, so that if you're married, then you've got this stick with your wife. But without a wife, then you got nothing. It's really, to try to make a friend with another male is extremely difficult. So you got that thing against you too.
Are you attributing that in part to the challenge in expressing yourself, your feelings and emotions?
Yeah, I think so. Males don't get together, I don't know. Well, maybe around here. But to get the couple guys to get together and talk. Well, I guess I'm talking for myself. I find that extremely difficult to do. And I look around at women, and they somehow naturally do this.
I might mention as a resource, I believe there's I don't know if you know about it, but I believe there's a men's group here at the church where that might be, it just is a potential resource. Yes.
I was just thinking about what Louise said about fear, and that brought up anxiety. Like, let's say you're having surgery. It might not be outright fear, but there's that dull kind of sense in your stomach around that, but a lot of stuff. And then I was remembering like mental health first aid and some things like that, where they say anxiety is the #1 mental health condition in the country. So that just brought up to me how common it is. So for me, now if it's surgery or something like that, that's different. But if I have low grade anxiety about something, if it's not major, sometimes I think, I'll try not to think about it for a day. I'm serious. I try to put it out of my mind. And then maybe later, it's gone. But I was just thinking about that comment about Louise about fear, how that also really, in my mind, kind of links in with anxiety. That's pretty common.
Yes, it is. And you know, it reminds me that another thing that we sometimes, besides hearing what the emotion is telling us and, you know, getting the message, sometimes we have to learn to control our anxiety. And that's why in the medical field, a researcher developed MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, an 8-week course that's offered all around the country. And that's the kind of thing. There's a lot of stories in the book about MBSR, written by John Kabat-Zinn, about people applying that to medical situations, people with very serious diseases, learning to meditate and relax their bodies as they go through these different procedures. So there's that too. It's not just changing. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious to know if you are aware of any current research that suggests the origins of feelings. I mean, are they primarily genetic? You mentioned evolutionary a little while ago, internal chemistry, body chemistry, or are they primarily environmental?
Well, as I said, there's many different theories of emotion. And
But
so
I guess my real
yes.
point is what is the foundational premise or
Evolution. I mean, evolution. These developed over time. They're coping, socially adaptive mechanisms to help us deal with each other in the world. Definitely, you know, bonding to each other. So they've shown the brain, the connections in there. Yes, Becky. Thank you.
One of the favorite new phrases in neuropsychology is that the brain is Teflon for negative emotions and Velcro, no, I'm getting it the other way around. Velcro for negative emotions and Teflon for positive emotions, and that's why human beings are still on the planet, you know, is that those people that had anxiety, that had fear, were the ones that were looking over their shoulder when the saber-toothed tiger was coming or the enemy were coming with their spears or something. So it's, as you said, evolutionary. It was like survival. And there's so many of our negative emotions, you know, the whole fight, flight, freeze thing, you know, is like, it's an ancient emotion that we keep having for situations that don't really call for that amount of negative reaction, but it is evolutionary. And there's also all sorts of things we do, like compare ourselves to other people, and all of this stuff is just, you know, ancient cave people survival kinds of emotions.
Yes, emotions are considered to be hardwired into our system. Joan.
I appreciated the fact you pointed out that emotions, the basic emotions, only last a few seconds. And that afterwards I get caught up in secondary emotions that can get me into a pattern. That's very helpful. And when I think of emotions, I try to remember that motion is in the word emotion and that it will pass. But then of all the emotions, I think love is different. Maybe our concept, we just had the one word for love, but as the New Testament shows us, there's the Greek agape, meaning the opening love for all people, and then the very evolutionary love, eros, which is our sexual impulse. And I think that in our culture we tend to confuse the two, that we think that romantic or erotic love is love. And I have a spiritual guide who says love is not an emotion. And I couldn't figure out what she meant by that. And then I thought, well, if the emotions are passing, and I suffer them or I understand them or I don't, but that, and she's referring to the universal love of all creatures for all creation. That's something I can rely on. And I recently had an operation that scared the hell out of me. And so in preparation for that, I told people I was really scared. I told the pastors, and they all prayed for me then. And that was very helpful. And I did look for a second opinion. And then 3 days before the operation, I went for a massage, and that did it. My body relaxed. And I was able to but I'm interested in what you think about love not being one of the emotions.
Well, it's not one of the 6 universal emotions, and there are different theories about it, but I think people think of love, the emotions of love, as being like empathy and compassion and sympathy and all these different aspects of it. I think it's a good question for the pastors, the question about love and what we think of, because what I'm giving you is definitely would be my opinion about it. I can't say what the consensus of all the researchers are about love, but it's interesting, it's not one of the emotions in the emotions textbooks that I see a lot of talking about love. Maybe because it's not one of the hardwired, maybe it is more of a state, a feeling, or even a concept. Does anyone else have any thoughts about love?
Well, I was just going to go back to the evolution. In the program that I've been exposed to, Mindful Self-Compassion, the evolution is the idea that the ancient brain does fight, flight, freeze, as Becky was saying. But interestingly enough, if you look at mammals, and we are also coming out of that, not reptilian brain, but also the mammalian brain, there is this fundamental tend and befriend, which we all have. Those are not, and I'm differentiating those from emotions. Those are instincts, survival approaches. We as human beings are born so totally dependent, and we stay dependent for so long that if there was not this tend and befriend in our brains, our species would have died. And so what we're talking about when you talk about love is something that's perhaps a little more, can I just say the word beautiful? And not necessarily evolutionary, but the evolutionary concept is that the mammal has tend and befriend. And that, I think, is something that's very important to understand. So, even those people who don't seem to show it have it somewhere.
There is one piece of research I'm thinking of that has to do with bonding, since you brought it up. And that is if you're in a relationship with someone and you break up, this has been shown through research that you will want to get back together. Your whole being will want to get back together with that person because we are biologically programmed to bond for the reasons that Nancy just mentioned, for the survival of our species. And so the recommendation is if this breakup is really good for you, that you need to enlist support. And you need to have a plan to keep yourself separate because you are going to want to go back with someone, no matter how much you know that relationship isn't good for you, because that's your biological programming. Want to see where we are in time-wise. Okay, we can take maybe I want you to have a few minutes to look at resources, and so we can maybe take another question. Anyone else? We've got a few burning desires. Okay, we'll give ourselves another 5 minutes. All right.
My friend Nancy here, when she does the communion service, always talks about the healing of all wounds. And for myself, it's important to remember that the mind heals as well as the body. And there are many ways: healing dreams, healing prayers, healing touch, healing silence, healing relationships, to focus on, the miracle of healing.
Thank you. Thank you. And then you, Lise.
Yeah, getting back to the question of what is love, I find it helpful to think of love as a verb. And we show love by our actions.
Thank you, Louise. Charlotte.
I was observing on this wonderful chart you have when you've broken down all these feelings into more nuanced ones, that the love-related ones was this one called love struck. And then there's one called turned on, which could be more than just sexual. But I thought that when Paul's description of love being a behavior is, so therefore it's not an emotion that would be on this chart. I don't see the word loving on this chart. But the behavior adds up to love. And maybe that's why we are so much in need of intentionality, community, self-reflection, and thoughtfulness, which incorporates all these emotions, but it doesn't reduce to them.
Thank you. Thank you for that thought. And you might be interested to know that particular list of words actually was designed for help for men who needed to carry around a list of feelings to sort of get in touch with what their different feelings were. Yes, Nancy.
Theologically, God is a verb, and God is love, and love would be the verb. I think it is also a gift, and it is a choice. And it is the determination to carry out that choice.
Thank you for all of your wonderful sharing about your ideas about love. I want to mention a couple things. First of all, special thanks to the mental health ministry team who've helped in all various ways in organizing this, to Robin Kemster, and also the reviewer, Carolyn Wong was the reviewer for this seminar. And I wanted to mention 2 new resources. Last time there was a request for a list of mental health professional abbreviations. So we have a list now. It's about 3 pages, and it's over on the resource table, if that would be helpful for you. All those letters that you see after mental health professionals' names, as well as from the National Institute of Mental Health, a document on psychotherapies, what to consider, how to find a therapist. That's also on the resource table this week. Those are new. So let's close with a prayer, and then we've got about 10 minutes that you feel free to check out books, look for resources, or just go through any of our literature. You're free to take anything that you would like. God of love, thank you for all of our emotions and for all of the understanding, all of the messages that they have for us. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for coming, Margie. Excuse me. Yeah. We have a book for books checkout. Great. Go for it.
So wonderful.
You're welcome. You're welcome. That's hi.
Hi. Thanks, that was good.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad you enjoyed it.